Okay, so I want you to close your eyes for a second. Picture New York City.
Okay.
But I don't mean the New York of, like, Taylor Swift or Friends, not the shiny skyscrapers.
Right. No expensive coffee shops.
None of that. I want you to picture 1977.
Oh, okay. The year of the blackout.
Exactly. The city is basically bankrupt. The Ford administration has told New York to, drop dead.
Yeah.
There's garbage piling up. Blocks are literally burning in the Bronx. And the rent in the Lower East Side is cheap. I mean, really, really cheap.
Which, historically speaking, is the exact recipe you need for a radical art scene.
It is.
Desperation plus cheap rent always equals innovation.
Right. And usually when we talk about this specific time downtown NYC, late 70s, everyone's mind just immediately goes to the Ramones.
Of course. Leather jackets, 3 chords.
1, 2, 3, 4. That's the punk story we all know.
It is. But if you walked, just a few blocks away from CBGB into the lofts, into the art galleries, there was something else going on.
Something darker.
Something much darker. It was a scene that looked at the Ramones and basically said, that's too traditional. That's just old rock and roll sped up.
They wanted to burn rock and roll down
Right.
to the ground.
Completely. This was the no wave movement. And right at the center of this chaotic, kind of terrifying, beautiful mess was a guy named James Chance and his band, the Contortions.
So welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is to unpack the chaos and the control of James Chance. We're going to figure out how a piano player from the Midwest,
The polite Midwest.
ended up defining the sound of New York City dance punk.
And we're going to dissect the actual structure of the music
Mhm.
because it's so easy to just hear it as noise. But there is a very deliberate, almost mathematical reason why his songs make you feel so anxious and so groovy at the same time.
It's this collision of like avant-garde jazz intellect with just raw punk aggression.
Yeah.
So let's start with the architect of it all, James Chance.
Yeah.
If you see photos of him from this era, he's got such a specific look. The pompadour hair, the tuxedo jacket that's a little too big for him.
And the saxophone. Always the saxophone.
He looks like a 1950s lounge singer who just got in a knife fight.
That is a perfect description, is that mix of elegance and just violence.
Right.
But here's the thing that always gets people. James Chance wasn't a street kid from Brooklyn.
No,
He was born James Siegfried
Ah.
in 1953
in Wisconsin.
in Wisconsin, the land of dairy farms and nice people.
A very, very far cry from the Bowery. And his musical background was not what you'd expect for a punk icon. I mean, he didn't start out thrashing on a guitar in a garage. He was a pianist.
So he actually had chops. He knew what he was doing.
He knew exactly what he was doing. He went to the Wisconsin Conservatory of Music, and his heroes weren't, the Rolling Stones or the Beatles. He was obsessed with free jazz.
Okay, let's pause there because free jazz is one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot.
It is.
For someone listening who might just think jazz is like dinner party music, what are we actually talking about? What did James Chance hear in that? So think about traditional music, whether it's Mozart or the Beatles. It has a grid.
Right.
You have a key signature, which tells you what notes sound good. And you have a tempo, which tells you when to clap.
A set of rules.
Exactly. Free jazz, especially the kind pioneered by people like Ornette Coleman, just took a sledgehammer to that grid.
Broke the rules on purpose.
Right. The whole philosophy was, what if the emotion of the moment is more important than the key signature? What if the rhythm changes based on how the saxophone player is feeling right now? It sounds like chaos.
Yeah, it sounds like it's falling apart.
But it's actually just highly expressive. It's about total freedom.
So when James Chance moves to New York in 1975, he's got this very highbrow, avant-garde philosophy in his back pocket. He wants to make music but has zero interest in making songs.
Not in the chorus verse sense,
Right.
no. He wants the intensity of rock, but the freedom of jazz. He lands in New York, bounces around a bit, plays in a band called Flaming Youth.
Right.
Then he has a stint in Teenage Jesus and the Jerks.
Which was Lydia Lunch's band, another absolute giant of that scene.
Huge. But James was, he was too controlling to just be a sideman. He had this very specific sound in his head, and he realized that to get that sound, that collision of funk and noise, he needed his own vehicle.
And that brings us to 1977, the formation of the Contortions.
Even the name.
The name itself. It doesn't sound pleasant. It sounds painful.
It's visceral. A contortion is a twisting, a struggle against your own body.
Mm.
And that is exactly what the music sounded like.
Yeah.
But to pull it off, he couldn't just hire, random punk musicians who knew 3 chords.
Right.
He needed a very specific alchemy.
So who did he bring in? Because that chemistry seems incredibly volatile.
The core lineup is crucial. You had Jody Harris on guitar, Don Christensen on drums, George Scott III on bass, Adele Bertai on keyboards. But if we really want to understand why they sounded so different, we have to talk about the slide guitar player, Pat Place.
Okay, see, this is where it gets weird for me. When I hear slide guitar, I think Allman Brothers.
Of course.
I think of the blues. I think of like sitting on a porch in the South.
Precisely. That's the traditional use of it,
Yeah.
right? Smooth, gliding notes, very melodic.
Yeah.
Pat Place did not do that. She apparently didn't even know how to play guitar in the traditional sense, which James Chance loved.
He wanted that amateurism.
He wanted the texture. Pat Place used the slide to create these jagged, scraping sounds.
Mm-hmm.
She treated the guitar almost like a percussion instrument that could scream. It wasn't about melody at all. It was about adding this high-pitched, metallic anxiety to everything.
So instead of a smooth glide, it's like scraping a knife against a toaster.
That's a great way to put it. And it worked. They start playing these art spaces, the lofts, CBGBs. They were loud, they were aggressive, they were weird, and then they get the ultimate stamp of approval for that era.
Brian Eno shows up.
Brian Eno shows up.
Yeah.
The godfather of ambient and art rock. He produces this compilation album in 1978 called No New York.
Legend.
The Contortions were on it, Teenage Jesus and the Jerks, Mars, DNA. That record basically defined the whole genre. If you owned No New York, you knew what no wave was. It validated the entire scene.
But the real manifesto, the core text, arrives in 1979, their debut album, Bye.
Yes, Bye is the Bible. If you want to understand that intersection of jazz, funk, and punk, this is where you start and end.
Okay, so let's get into the mechanics of the sound, because we promised we'd explain why it works. On the surface, it can sound like a lot of noise, but you're arguing there's a rigorous structure under there. Let's take the track. Contort Yourself.
This is their hit, if you can even call it that.
Well,
Contort Yourself is just a masterclass in what I call rhythmic tension.
break that down.
It starts with the drums. It's this frantic, irregular 16th note pattern. It's super busy. It makes you feel rushed, almost panicky.
But then the bass comes in, and the bass is not rushing at all. The bass is grooving.
And that's the anchor. The bass line is pure funk. It's repetitive. It locks you in. But then you have James Chance on top screaming and blowing this atonal saxophone that sounds like it's trying to fight the rest of the band.
So I've heard this described as the wobble. Can you explain that? Because I think that's the key to why this music makes people want to move.
The wobble is this brilliant psychoacoustic effect. The beat is technically 44, right? Your standard dance beat. But the snare drum accents, they're placed on the offbeats and they keep shifting slightly.
So your body wants to dance because of the bass?
Exactly. Your hips are totally locked into that funk groove. But your brain is slightly confused about where the one is because the snare keeps moving around. It creates this sensation of instability.
Oh, that's cool.
It's like you're trying to walk on a ship in rough seas.
Mm-hmm.
You have to constantly adjust your balance to stay upright.
That's such a great way to put it. It forces physical engagement. You have to pay attention to the rhythm to stay with it.
It's dance music, but it's anxious dance music. It replicates the feeling of living in a city that is actively falling apart. You're moving, but you're also kind of looking over your shoulder.
Wow. So the music isn't just a soundtrack to the city, it's a simulation of the city.
That's it, exactly.
Let's talk about another track, Melt Yourself Down. I mean, the title alone suggests a total loss of control.
This track shows the duality of the band perfectly.
Mm.
So you have a saxophone riff that just repeats relentlessly. It's hypnotic, but also it's kind of annoying. Intentionally.
Okay.
Underneath that, the drums and bass are locked into this incredibly tight, precise funk pattern. They are the control.
And the chaos.
The chaos comes from the guitars and keyboards. They're just playing these dissonant, clashing sounds on top. They're creating all this friction against that tight rhythm section.
So it feels like this song is trying to tear itself apart, but the rhythm section just refuses to let it.
That is the energy source.
Yeah.
If it was all chaos, it would just be noise. If it was all funk, it'd just be a James Brown cover band. The magic and the danger is in that collision. It's the sound of a structure under extreme stress.
So James Chance establishes this incredible sound. He's the king of no wave.
Huh.
And then he does something that, on paper, seems like absolute career suicide for a punk rocker in 1979.
Uh-huh.
he pivots to disco.
The forbidden genre.
I mean, we have to remember the context here. Disco Sucks was practically a religion for rock fans.
Oh, yeah. They were literally burning disco records in baseball stadiums.
And here comes James Chance, Mr. Downtown Art Punk Cool, with a new persona, James White and the Blacks, and an album called Off-White.
It was an incredibly punk rock move because it was so hated, you know. He was basically trolling his own audience. But artistically, he was trying to solve a problem. He realized that the Contortions were just difficult for regular people to dance to.
The wobble was too much.
The wobble was too much for a mass audience. He wanted to fuse that no-wave improvisation with a structure that was just undeniable.
The 4 on the floor.
The disco heartbeat. That kick drum on every single beat. Thump, 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 thump.
Yeah.
You don't have to think about where the beat is. It just hits you in the chest.
So let's look at a track like Flexi-Disc from that era, because it doesn't sound like the Bee Gees. How is he smuggling his avant-garde ideas into a disco song?
You should think of it like a Trojan horse.
Okay.
The outside of the song is pure disco. It has the beat. It has that simple pumping bass line. It invites you onto the dance floor. It says, come on, it's safe to dance here.
But once you're on the dance floor...
Once you're inside, the soldiers jump out. The saxophone starts doing these wild atonal improvisations that have nothing to do with disco. And the lyrics start dealing with these really heavy themes about race, identity, social decay.
He's tricking you into consuming high art while you're shaking your hips.
He's proving that you don't have to dumb down the music to make it danceable.
Yeah.
He was just playing with the format of pop music, stretching it to see how much weirdness it could hold before it snapped.
And we have to talk about the live experience, because reading accounts of these shows, intense, is an understatement. It sounds more like a riot than a concert.
It was confrontational theater. There were these live recordings from Paris in 1980 and New York in 81 that just capture this hostility. James did not want the audience to be passive consumers.
Right. He didn't want you just standing there sipping a beer.
No. I've heard stories of him actually jumping into the crowd and fighting people.
Yeah, he did.
He did, frequently. He would physically confront audience members who weren't dancing or who looked bored. He'd grab them, scream in their face. He just wanted a reaction. Hate him, love him, fine. But you had to feel something.
It sounds terrifying, honestly.
Yeah.
But musically, how did that aggression translate to the way the band played their instruments live?
It pushed the roles of the instruments even further into abstraction. So the guitar live, it wasn't playing riffs. It was just functioning as blocks of sound.
Pure noise.
Pure percussive noise, yeah, just to accent the rhythm. The drums used those irregular snare hits to create constant auditory tension. And James, he wasn't playing melodic solos. He used the saxophone to create these continuous walls of sound, these repetitive phrases that would just grate on your nerves until you entered a kind of trance.
That sounds exhausting and
Yeah.
frankly unsustainable. You can't keep that level of hostility up forever.
You really can't. And James Chance was a demanding band leader. Think James Brown, but from hell.
Wow.
He demanded absolute precision from the rhythm section. He would literally fine members if they missed a beat, but then demanded total chaos from everyone else.
So the band starts to crack.
Inevitably. That kind of intensity just burns people out. Pat Place left to form the Bush Tetras.
Another legendary band. Too Many Creeps.
The classic.
No.
Jody Harris went to the Ray Beats. George Scott III ended up touring with John Cale.
It's like the Contortions was a university for downtown cool. Everybody graduated and formed their own amazing bands.
They really did. The band effectively just imploded in the early 80s. But the impact, that's a whole other story.
Before we get to the legacy, I know there was a reunion much, much later.
Yeah, remarkably, in 2001, the original members got back together, which is a miracle given how volatile it all was.
For sure.
I think they realized they had created something truly special. They even put out a single in 2016, Melt Yourself Down, a callback to the classic track.
And James Chance himself kept going right up until the end.
He did. He kept performing, kept that persona alive.
Yeah.
He passed away just recently, in June of 2024 at age 71.
Wow.
And it really felt like the final door closing on that specific era of New York City grit.
So let's zoom out. We've just spent all this time talking about a band that was really only active for a few years in the late 70s. Why does this matter? Why are we dissecting James Chance in 2026?
Because James Chance and the Contortions are basically patient zero for dance punk. You literally cannot have bands like LCD Sound System or The Rapture or even the without the blueprint that James Chance drew up.
You mentioned bands like ESG and Liquid Liquid as direct descendants.
Direct influence. Those bands took that rhythmic complexity and that minimalism, the idea that you could do a lot with very little, and they just ran with it. James Chance proved that smart music and body music didn't have to be enemies.
That's the key insight for me. We often think of music in these binaries. It's either, catchy pop for the masses or it's intellectual art for the critics.
Yeah.
James Chance lived in that gray area.
The dangerous area.
Yeah.
He showed that you could take the complex theories of free jazz atonality, harmonics, and package them in a way that just hit you directly in the gut. He refused to compromise. He didn't dumb it down for the disco crowd, and he didn't make it sterile for the jazz crowd.
And it's true, when you listen to By Today, it does not sound retro.
Not at all. It sounds urgent. If a new band released Contort Yourself tomorrow on Spotify, it would still sound fresh. And that's the mark of true innovation. It stands outside of time because it wasn't following a trend. It was creating a whole new language.
It's amazing what a piano player from Wisconsin can do when you drop him in a bankrupt city.
Sometimes you need that pressure cooker to create a diamond.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a thought to chew on. We live in an era of extreme musical polish. Everything is quantized. Everything is auto-tuned to perfection. The grid we talked about earlier is now absolute.
It's very safe, very predictable. There are no surprises.
Exactly. And James Chance taught us that the mistake, the wobble, the friction, that feeling that the song is about to collapse, is actually the most human part of the music. It's the part that makes us feel alive.
We've lost the danger. We've sanitized all our playlists.
So here's the challenge for you. Why are we so afraid of the mistake in modern culture? And what would happen if we let a little more of that contortions chaos back into our lives?
I think we'd all be a little more anxious, but we'd definitely be dancing harder.
I think you're right. Go listen to Bye. Turn it up loud. Thanks for diving deep with us.
See you next time.